How do we share faith when it seems that no one is interested? How do we engage young people who are dabbling with manifesting, crystals, or witchcraft? Or those people who say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not into organized religion. In our fast-paced world where people think, does it even matter if there is a God? How do we stir up spiritual curiosity and spark faith in those relationships? I'm Melanie Cave, Managing Director at Roots, and in the latest in our series on helping young people share faith, today I'm speaking with Joy and Darren Stevens. They've both worked with young people for over 25 years and lead a charity called Start to Stir. We talk about how to start open-ended, spiritually curious conversations, how to listen well, finding common ground, and sharing a bit of what we believe. Most encouragingly, we take the pressure off one-time conversations and open up relationships that take young people on the journey of faith. I think you'll find their insights and wisdom empowering. Thanks for joining us on the Roots for Churches podcast. Here we go. Welcome, Joy and Darren, to the Roots for Churches podcast. Great to have you.
Great to be here, Melanie. Thanks.
So we're in the middle of a series exploring how we share faith, how we equip people in our churches, whether it's the young people, whether it's the adults, and growing in our confidence of sharing the good news of Jesus. But before we dig into all the nitty-gritty of that, can you give folks listening a bit of a background on who you are and how you got interested in evangelism and that setting?
Yeah, we're Darren and Joy. Our accents will give us away as being from a different part of the country, but different part of the world even. But we lived in the UK for the last 25 years and worked with young people and training youth leaders. And it kind of all started when we were in university and we were invited to go on a couple summer missions. We ended up in the UK and in Europe, and we were trained how to share faith, and it looked very much like what some of our pictures of sharing faith would be: going out on the street and engaging in conversation, maybe try to trick people into conversations about God and about faith. And it was good. It built our courage. God used it. We had loads of great conversations and stories we could share. And that really drew our heart to working in the UK. And so when we moved here, we were able to work in the communities and in the schools, in the churches. And we found all the stuff that we learned about sharing our faith on the street. It didn't really work with the young people and our neighbors and friends that we saw day to day. So we learned we had to find some different approaches and actually really start from a completely different starting point than what we had been starting from.
I think it's interesting because often we have these skills that we learn for street evangelism, which are about, talking to complete strangers who you're hopefully never going to see again because you've just embarrassed yourself so much and you were quite weird with them probably. That's not true. Hopefully you had an amazing conversation. They've come to faith and now they're in your church, so you will see them again. But as you say, some of the ideas that we have or the methods that some of us have been taught around sharing faith with people rely on it being a complete stranger. And then those don't work when you're in relationship with somebody regularly. So what changed? What did you pick up? What were the new tools?
Well, one of the first things is just a reminder that sharing faith is a process that happens over time. So we get these early trainings or early experiences, and then we kind of get stuck thinking that sharing faith is this one-time point in time encounter. And I've got to get all of my truth out in one go before the bus stop comes or before whatever it is that we're in this place where we feel we could have this conversation with someone. And yeah, I think just shifting that evangelism or sharing faith is not just a one point in time encounter, and that we can pace alongside the people that we know, our neighbors, our coworkers, the moms at the toddler group, whatever it is. We don't have to run ahead of where they are at and what the Holy Spirit is doing. And it can be this much more interactive, listening to the Holy Spirit, pacing with them, and working towards helping them to understand the fullness of the gospel. But I don't have to do it all in one conversation.
That takes a lot of pressure off.
Yeah.
I think we also learned, people were just starting from a very different starting point than we imagined. So when we started working with young people in the schools and in the community, and we rely on some of those traditional methods and even some of the well-known Christian faith exploration courses, it wasn't that the young people were against it. It was just, so what? It was this indifference. And I think some of the recent pieces of research especially from Youthscape out of Luton, really have supported that. Young people aren't necessarily against faith, they're just not always thinking about it. And there's this warm apathy, is the phrase that Youthscape uses from their Translating God research.
So warm apathy, what are the questions they're thinking about? Are they just thinking about what am I doing at the weekend? What's on television or Netflix or whatever? Or are they thinking spiritual questions at all?
That's a really good question. I mean, in our experience, having to overcome this indifference, it really is. Well, there might be a God, but I I can't really see any difference that would make. So maybe that's the question. If there is any questions, it might be, yeah, I've got a friend who's a Christian, and I can't really see how that would make any difference in my life. Or, yeah, I think that's one key one is very very practical. What difference would it make for me to be connected to God?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was some of the research from Youthscape, is the incredible lack of questions. I mean, that's even what they titled one of the pieces before COVID, was no questions asked. They expected young people to have all these big questions about life and faith, and they didn't. And yeah, so I go into our local secondary school every week and we run a CU, and we've been talking about faith all year, but just in the last week, we kind of had a check in of, okay, guys, where are you at? Have you changed any of your thoughts? Has this become more plausible? I didn't use the word plausible, but, and yeah, a couple of the students were just like, yeah, I do think differently than before, but mainly because I just never thought about it. And now I'm thinking about it. So I think there's an incredible lack of questions. And we'll probably get around to some of the newer research and the newer spiritual openness. But yeah, I think that question of, does it work? Why would it matter? How could it make my life any better? Are some of the real practical questions that are at the surface today.
So if young people aren't asking questions, they're not even that spiritually interested, how do you even start having God conversations with them? What do you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we had to learn, how to stir up curiosity. And so we spent a long time working through that and trying different things, experimenting. And I think what we landed on was, we can bank on the fact that every human being is a spiritual being. Okay. So
Mm.
even though it might be, so Chris Curtis at Youthscape talks about, faith is there. It's just buried under a thick layer of cultural dust. It's under there. So how can we brush away that dust and kind of stir up those spiritual longings, or those parts of our spiritual identity? And it's not really a new approach. I mean, if you look way back in the book of Acts, Paul was doing a similar thing. So when he first started out on his mission, he went to the synagogue and with the God fearing Greeks to start with, but he would start to go out into the marketplace. So you get this little passage in Acts 17 where he's in Athens, and he really does a lot of what we would call early evangelism or early faith sharing, where it really is just kind of, hey, that little God consciousness, or that longing to know someone more, someone bigger, that's down there in you. Let's take
Mm.
that and bubble it to the surface. So really, it's not a new thing, but we've tried to kind of resurrect that early evangelism of stirring up curiosity around our identity.
Yeah, and I think also in that Acts 17 passage where he's in Athens, it's this, he finds common ground. And
Mm.
so in that passage, he comes to them and he says, I looked around and I saw that you have a monument to an unknown God. And, so it's this whole thing of, you believe in God or you believe in spiritual things. I believe in spiritual things too. Or you believe in that there's power out there. If you're talking to someone who's into new age spirituality, I believe that there's power we can access as well. Or, it's trying to find common ground and to say, I see what what you're aiming for here. And I believe that too. And can we talk about it?
And do you feel like that's shifted? I'm just aware of current research that's out there saying Gen Z is very spiritually interested, or they're turning up at church, or they're buying Bibles. Possibly their parents have had no faith or never gone to church, but they are interested. Now, I would say maybe our work colleagues, people my age, might be more cynical, but I feel like my children's age, their peers are very interested in God and spirituality. Have you seen that shift in your ministry?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a shifting. And I mean, I know some churches are seeing young adults and young people just show up in the church. We haven't seen that in our own local context, but I definitely feel like 10 years ago, I think the default was, oh, I'm an atheist. Like when you talk to the young people, even if they had never thought about it, it's, I'm an atheist. And that was a really challenging point to start from.
Hmm.
Where I do see now there's more neutrality or openness. Uh, I'm spiritual, but I don't really know what that means. So I think that's really what we're seeing is there's an openness. Young people will define themselves as spiritual without knowing what it means, and it doesn't mean they're actively seeking. So you've thought about this quite a bit, Joy.
Yeah, I mean, there's young people who have this vague spirituality of I think there's probably something out there that holds everything together or that connects everything. I'm just not sure what it is.
Mhm.
And so they would define themselves as spiritual, but they're not necessarily seeking anything. They just are happy to exist and that there's something out there. But to be honest, that's a warmer place to start than someone who's decided that they are an atheist. There's people who are into self help spirituality. So that's mixing new age spirituality with kind of pop psychology. And that's where you're going to have your, people manifesting. I just met with my girls' discipleship group last night, and before their GCSEs, there was a circle of them. And one of the girls, one of the non Christian girls said, let's all hold hands and pray to the manifesting gods. And the Christian girl in the group, she did, she got caught and she kind of participated, but she later needed to debrief. Like I needed to say something and I'll say something the next time. But so, there's lots of 15-year-old girls who are
Yeah.
thinking that they're going to pray to a manifesting God. And then there's people who have been hurt in church. And so there's what I'd call church refuser spirituality, where I'm spiritual, but I'm going to go it alone because I'm not into organized religion because they've been hurt. And so how we talk about faith with something like that is just needs to be so tender, so willing to listen, so willing to ask questions about their experience.
Mm.
And then of course there is people who are getting into powered centered spirituality that is looking for power from different places, and often those places are dark and they can enslave us rather than bring us freedom. And so yeah, there's lots of conversations to be had around with people who are now saying I'm spiritual, but it's so important for the gospel that we listen long enough and well enough to know which one of those are they, and there could be many others. Those are just kind
Yeah.
of the ones I've compiled in my mind, but where are they starting from, and that we don't run ahead of that, because if they're spiritual but have been hurt by the church, again, that's going to take a lot of kind conversations and generosity. And it's important that we know that's where they're starting rather than
Mm.
coming in with, oh, you better watch out for that spirituality stuff because it's going to, you know, a real warning.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, listening as the start of evangelism rather than telling. And I think that is the shift, isn't it? Is that we were often taught a script. And as you said earlier, the idea of you need to convince people or get them to agree to these ideas. Whereas the Holy Spirit is already at work in people's lives, and that gentle listening, how can I meet you where you're at and help you take a step forward, or just stay where you are if that's where it is, but be affirmed in that place. Can we dig into some of those? Because Roots has just literally written a resource around this whole manifesting topic, because we do think it comes up quite a lot with youth groups, and also it's all over social media. And I think Christians, it's somewhere between positive thinking and prayer. And I think Christians can get sucked into it quite easily because the language is quite similar. But I worry that maybe Christians don't know enough about it, and therefore you can't have a very helpful conversation with somebody. If you had a young person or even a peer who was engaging in all of this, how would you engage with that conversation with them?
Yeah, I think you're right, Melanie, too. So we go up and down the country and train quite often, and especially youth leaders and church leaders. And I think church leaders and youth leaders above a certain age have no clue about manifesting, or like when we talk about angel numbers and that thing, they're just not aware of it. So I think it is important to know about and to read about. Yeah, and how do you respond to that when somebody talks about manifesting? Because in my spirit, it's like, "Oh, no, dangerous day," and I wanna warn and I want to correct, and again, I go back and look at Paul in Athens, and he didn't condemn them. He saw it as a springboard, as a jumping off point, and so
Mm.
I think we've learned how to do that, and we're still learning how to do that, but I think it is embracing it. Hey, yeah, I recognize that you want to connect with someone or something bigger, and
Mhm.
you want someone or something to be in control. As independent as we say we are as humans,
Yeah.
you really do want to depend on someone or something. And and what is that or who is that? And we have a lot of friends or young people that say, "Well, I prayed to the universe." And so we've learned to ask, like, okay, how do you know that the universe has your best interests in mind? Or is it a force or a person? So, yeah, asking questions. Like you said, it's always asking
Mm.
questions, not condemning from the start, and then using that common ground as a springboard to, I think this is really what you're looking for and who you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And I think some of it could be like they've just never encountered Jesus or and never known that God is loving and never known that God, the idea of providence, like that Christian concept of God is for you and God does provide and God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. The fact that the world works and is ticking along is evidence of God.
Mm,
Whereas other people go, "Oh, that's the universe. The universe is for
Yeah.
me," or
Mhm.
and but like there is that sense of like we're recognizing the same thing. We're recognizing that the world is would be chaotic. It feels like there's some divine force behind it guiding it. Like that's a good instinct that people who
mm.
don't know God would recognize that. Um, how that sort of you say, I feel like that step of common ground, that's really important. But where do you go from that? Is it more questions or how are you stirring things up and leading them on?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've found, again, it's really helpful to start with identity. So it's with the young people we work with and with friends, and it's as a human being, I believe that you are a spiritual being. And by that, we mean you have a spirit or you have a soul. And then I think giving language, that's another thing we do. So your identity, you're a spiritual being, but let's give you some language because it's such a nebulous
Mm.
idea, isn't it? So let's give you some language around that and then help you to experience your soul in action. So we could use lots of words and lots of philosophical ideas and theories, but instead of all that, let's just help you experience your soul in action. And so that's what we've really tried to cultivate. And the tools we've created, that's really what they help to do.
I think, yeah, we have to ask more questions, and then there
Hmm.
comes a point, doesn't there, that we have to break through, like we call it the spiritual sound barrier, where it gets a little bit hard for us to break through, and so we've been learning more recently to ask lots of good questions. But then have we've earned the right a lot of the time to maybe make one statement as well, to not just leave people with I wonder about you and I wonder about everything, but to also add a statement. So like a question we ask all the time is what do you if someone says I'm spiritual but not religious, well, what do you mean by spiritual? And then is spirituality something you practice and listening to what they practice? And then just saying, I'm gonna take that hard next step to say, "Oh, I believe we're all spiritual. We all have a spirit or a soul that longs to connect with God." And so not stopping with just questions, but choosing to make a few statements as well that point towards the true and living God in these conversations.
And then what happens? Is there that like moment of like this is when you're praying under your breath, but like if they're like, "Oh, I'm interested," then it's
Yeah.
obvious. But if they just kind of if it falls on like blank
So
face.
yeah, so, I mean, to be honest, I've done this with some friends that I've had, moms at the school gates type of thing, and one of the things the next steps I would do is if they're into spirituality or different forms. I mean, I fumble a lot. I don't get this right every time. I, have a lot of I'm like, "Oh, I wish I just could go back and do that again," but one thing I learned to do is just to say, "Well, I'm interested in what you believe." And I said, as a Christian, we have like what we would call, and I try to use simple words, like a a theology around the reasons we believe that what we believe. I'd love to just go and walk with you and hear about what are some of the reasons that you that the stories that underpin what you believe. And so I've done that with a friend one time, and we walked for hours. And she told me she prayed to the universe, which is kind of how we got into this. And she told me some stories and myths and New Age legends that kind of underpinned her beliefs. And I listened for a long time. And then after about an hour and a half, she said, "Now, how does that compare to what you believe?" And then I got to say the common ground. I got to say, well, I also believe that love is at the center of the universe, but love is not an impersonal force. It's the person of God. And I got to find all that common ground and then move it forward from there. So that's how I handle it, is I ask them more questions about what they believe and why they believe. And because, to be honest, with a lot of those types of belief systems, those New Age and pop psychology type of belief systems, there's no one's pressing them to back up any of it with logical anything. So yeah, that's how I do it.
So a lot of it's experience based as well. Well, I manifest this and it happened, therefore it must be true. And people might argue that the same as I had an answered prayer, therefore God must be real. So I can see it from their perspective as well. But you're right, it doesn't necessarily all hold together intellectually sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't, Melanie, I don't think we see a lot of these aha one point in time moments. I think it really is a slow and steady. And so with most young people that in the schools or in the community and the church groups we work with, there's not usually this, "Oh, yeah, I get it now. I am a spiritual person." It's kind of like you're slowly removing barriers. You're slowly removing misconceptions and apologetics, that again, they'd call that the plausibility. And in those, it has to be, the Christian faith has to be plausible before they'll start to get interested in it. Again, they would never use that word, and it's not a conscious thing. So I feel like I'm still usually a couple steps ahead of where the young person or my friend or neighbor, but I'm slowly removing those barriers. And it's like, oh yeah, they say, yeah, I think after, the last 6 weeks of these sessions that we did in a youth club or a school, or just conversations, like, yeah, I think I am a spiritual being, and I think there might be something else out there. So, it's not this aha, but it's slow.
Yeah.
And then I can say, "Oh, that's great. Like, I really want to start to introduce you to God. And so you can start to see the difference he can make in your life." So that's kind of where we go next with it.
Yeah. And even if a young person doesn't make a decision when they're in high school, like ultimately that spiritual openness goes with them. Those questions go with them, doesn't it? And then when something hits later in life, they're like, maybe I will check out church. Those people were all right, So it doesn't always, as we're often hoping that things will happen quickly, aren't we? We like instant results. Yeah. But I think you're right. It's that verse, I watered, some planted, some watered, and some reap. And you don't always get to see the evidence of what you've put into somebody's life.
Yeah. And that's what I think, that's the thing that kind of drives us at Start to Stir. Like, we can see, could we all start to stir? Can you imagine if we all got out there and just were willing to have these conversations, not that had to end with, "Will you pray a sinner's prayer?" But what do I see you're really into justice. Where do you think that longing for justice comes from? Or I see you knock on wood a lot, and you talk about, and you're people are superstitious. I see that might point to just a longing for someone to be in control. Who do you think is in control? If we were just all skilled at stirring up spiritual conversations, if we're all willing to put aside our own agendas and to enter those more willingly, I just think we'd have a great harvest if we could all begin to start to have more spiritual conversations.
Yeah. What about, okay, so as Americans who've lived in the UK for a while, what is there about our culture that doesn't like talking about spirituality? I think my hunch is that there's a British thing of like, religion is private. We don't talk about those kind of things. We don't ask how much people earn. We definitely don't talk about how much people weigh or their age. And we don't talk about religion. Like, there's some social rules here. And I think sometimes talking about talking about religion is definitely taboo. Is talking about spirituality still taboo, do you feel? Or have you noticed that?
I feel like talking about spirituality is less taboo and maybe not taboo at all. I do feel like it's such more of an open door. So we're quite new on the street we live on. We live on a muse, which is a very British thing, I feel like. But it's great because it's kind of defined cul-de-sac for the American audience. So you kind of know who your neighbors are, who your community, and they got together early on when we moved here for coffee and cake or something. And I sat next to my neighbor, Bob. That's not his real name, and he was telling me all about how he's into astrophysics, and I was like, "No, I'm in way over my head." But and how the universe, there's all these mysteries, and he loves thinking about all that stuff. He talked for about 15 minutes. Then he turned to me and he said, "No, but you work for the church, right? So you're religious. I'm not religious, but I'm glad some people are." And so I said, "Well, that's interesting, Bob, because you just went on for 15 minutes about astrophysics and the mysteries of the universe. So you're not religious, but would you say that you're spiritual?" And he's like, "Now that's a question, because I've had some things happen that I can't explain in my life. And so, yeah, well, we need to talk about that. We need to get a coffee." And so, again, it wasn't one of these conversation enders. It was, I don't think it's taboo. I think it's an open door.
Yeah. Yeah. So spirituality feels like a big open door. But Joy, you mentioned earlier that there's a whole sort of group of people who are like church refusing. And now I think this is probably generational, maybe. So I don't think there's very many Gen Zs who are church refusing because they haven't got any church to refuse. They haven't been part of one.
Right.
But I think there probably are some millennials, some Gen X and older boomers who have, whether they've been hurt directly, probably quite a fair few have been hurt directly, or have experienced church hurt in their wider family experience and are therefore like, nope, not going there. Or they've seen it in the news, maybe some sort of sexual misconduct or something like that. And rightly so, with a heart for justice, think that's wrong. And therefore I can't go near that. I'm kind of hurt on their behalf.
Yeah.
How have you approached people? And I know this is like, you can't give a one size fits all because every church hurt and every person is different, but how do you approach that? You mentioned before generosity, but I think for many people, yeah, you can go to share faith with somebody and then they're like, you get all this hurt that comes up at you and you're like, oh, I don't know quite how to handle this because I wasn't in that church, or I also agree that that's wrong. But how have you navigated those kind of conversations and stirred up faith and curiosity in spite of all of that?
That thick skin to absorb all the things that they need to say is long and challenging. And then, if you can pace with them long enough to work through some of that, some conversations around, what I believe is that spirituality is not something we're supposed to do alone. And that there's things about God that I can only understand by being a part of his community. And so that's why, I mean, at that point, all I can really do is to talk about, I understand, I'm listened along about why you refuse to engage with the church.
Been hurt by
Or
it.
been hurt by it. But can I tell you why I'm still in it? I acknowledge my church is not perfect. There is no perfect church, but there are things that I can only experience about God, or any of us can only experience God as we live in community together. And so it's less about God says you're supposed to be part of a church. So be part of a church and come from our experience and say, I need the things that community offers me, or being part of God's bride really offers me. And those are things that we often want to avoid when we make up kind of our own spirituality. So it's things like, I need forgiveness, and I need to learn to forgive. And when I'm a lone ranger out there doing it all by myself, then I don't have to ever engage in those parts of Christian spirituality that are difficult. But that is what I need more than anything. And so even talking about that there is a buffet of things I could believe out there. But the reason I'm on one track, which is Christianity, and not just taking from the buffet, is that Christianity, helps me to engage with things that I wouldn't do on my own, but I need more than anything else. And one of those big things is to forgive and to be forgiven.
Mm. Yeah. Our culture is very selfish. Like, it's all about how do we get more out of this, or how do we, how do I get what meets my needs?
Yeah.
And I think it's Brene Brown. She says that the church is one of the only places where you like worship and take communion next to somebody who votes politically differently to you, who thinks totally differently. You know, their social media algorithm is totally different. She's like, I think that's really healthy. And I was like, yeah, I don't think there's very many settings anymore where we are confronted by diversity and challenged to like embrace it and love it.
Yeah.
I think most of our church, most of our world and our school, they're people that are like us, the same neighborhood, same age. You know, everything is, the algorithms drive everything. So we get exactly what we want. And church isn't algorithm driven, but that makes it awkward and difficult. And yeah. But I think it's hard as well if people have been hurt, and that forgiveness thing, because within the church hurt thing, people can often be hurried into forgiveness or
Yeah.
told to just get over stuff
Yeah.
when they're not ready.
Mm.
So yeah, holding space, as you say, to hear people, and it takes longer than we think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think just learning to say sorry as well. So there's lots of conversations I have where someone shares their past hurt from the church, and I say, "Hey, if that's that's not true Christianity, and if no Christian has ever said sorry for that, I just want to say I'm sorry. That shouldn't happen, and
Mm.
that was done in the name of God, and I don't believe that's God in God's heart. So I'm sorry." I read somewhere once where a church actually brought a confessional booth out onto the high street, and they were apologizing for the things the church has done throughout history. I thought that was quite
Yeah.
clever, quite
Like
poignant.
reverse confessional. The
Yeah,
church
reverse
is
confession.
confessing.
Yeah, reverse confessional. Which maybe
Yeah.
that's the first thing we need to do as churches is each of our towns we need to have a reverse confessional booth.
Mm. Yeah, because people hold on to grudges longer than you think. I remember a very long time ago, I was working with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and there was a whole group of people that went and traveled the route of the Crusades, all through like Muslim territory, and basically apologized for the Crusades.
Wow.
And people were kind of scratching their heads going, wait a minute, this happened like thousands of years ago. Nobody is alive now that was impacted. But they said when they went into these places, they would go to the mosque and they would apologize for what Christian ancestors did. People would be weeping. And they were like, we did not realize quite how long the memory of these sort of things holds on, even if it hasn't happened directly to you. And it's like, I don't know, such and so was mean to my grandma. And we can hold on to that as a church hurt, or and yeah, there is a lot of hurt out there, and if we can do anything to confess it and heal it, wouldn't that be? I wonder how many people that would free up.
Yeah, because it's another one of these barriers, isn't it? So that like
Yes.
if we as a church could all work together just to chip away at some of these barriers, that's part of the work of the harvest, right? I mean,
Getting the
most of us
rocks out of the field.
yeah, yeah. And most of us aren't farmers, so we don't do that. But yeah, if you don't get the rocks out and pull the weeds, you're not going to have a harvest.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good picture. You also mentioned sort of power dynamics and witchcraft, that kind of stuff that young people are engaging with. Like witch talk is a thing on TikTok. There is quite a lot of interest, and I guess that is almost evidence of this spiritual curiosity. But again, the church is an interesting, legacy. Maybe this is other things we need to apologize for as the church, whether it's burning people at the stake in the very long time ago, or just how people reacted to Harry Potter in the 80s. And that wasn't 80s, early 2000s, wasn't it? But it feels like a long time ago. The churches have quite reactionary, like, definitely this is wrong. And witchcraft is not helpful. But how do we, in conversation with young people who are interested in this, how do we manage our reactions and listen long enough to be able to hear what's going on? Because I think most people are like, oh no, you shouldn't get into that. And we don't listen long enough to hear what the real story is. Can you help guide us with that?
Yeah, Melanie, that's a great question. And that's probably the main question we get from leaders who have tried to use our STIR course, which is kind of like a pre-alpha or pre-Christianity Explored. It bubbles up these spiritual longings and gives language. And they're kind of freaked out by it. A lot of leaders are like, well, I don't know how comfortable I feel opening this door to spirituality and not closing it quite quickly. And so, yeah, I've learned, and we've done a lot of coaching of leaders to just say, yeah, spirituality isn't neutral. So as you're having these conversations or as you're leading people, pacing with them. So yeah, there are, I believe there are good spirits and evil spirits out there, and I want to help you find the good spirituality that comes from God, because
Mm.
there are dangerous and evil spirits that want to wreck your life, and I want that they're dangerous and want to keep you away from those.
Or even asking, as you're having the conversations, have you ever had an experience? Maybe they're crystals or whatever they're practicing that made you feel some darkness, and just kind of drawing attention to that there's light and there's darkness, that there's good spirituality and there's dark enslaving spirituality. And
Yeah, it's again questioning like when you had that encounter, did that scare you or did that bring you peace? And often it will have scared them. It's like, okay, well, that's a little clue that that's not the right path. Let's help you get on the right path.
It's fascinating because I think generationally, like right and wrong. For many people, like, yes, that's right, that's wrong, witchcraft bad, Jesus good, that sort of classic black and white dichotomy. Whereas other people are like, oh, well, it's all right for them, but not all right for me. And so that sort of, is it postmodern or is it just sort of a tolerant view? But the idea of labeling things good and bad, I think young people are less keen. There's so much tolerance, they're less keen to label those things. But when we're talking about experiences, they seem to know in your gut that if things cause me fear, it's probably not what I want. But they might still not want to label it evil. And I've had lots of conversations with sort of older teens about, hallucinogenics or that kind of thing of like taking gummies and getting high and then having these mind opening experiences or whatever. And what are they tapping into? And is that just altered consciousness? Is that spirituality? And it's funny because I think growing up, the church leaders would be like, just no.
Mhm.
Say no to drugs, kids, no. Whereas now I think you get a lot more people who are like, well, I think it's an experience. It's okay. It's not. And so how do we, again, it's that open-minded, stirring up curiosity while at the same time not wanting to encourage young people to get into things that are way over their head or where they're going to bring harm to themselves spiritually.
Yeah. And I think it's comforting because we're not the first ones, are we, to ask these kind of questions. And I think we've been in a really unique place in the West the last, what, 400, 500 years where, and again, that's what, when we started, we're really working with young people and friends and neighbors who didn't believe in anything spiritual. There's only matter. There's, the new atheists were winning at the time. And so if we could help them believe in any kind of thing spiritual, any kind of spiritual beings, that felt like a victory. Where now, yeah, I think there is a lot more openness and dabbling,
Mm.
and we're learning a lot about. There's a little book called The Three-Dimensional Gospel, and in the West, we've really focused on the aspect of the gospel. Guilt and innocence is the
Yeah.
paradigm. So Jesus forgives our sins because we're guilty, and that's a true part of the gospel. But other parts of the world, especially the Southern Hemisphere, the fear and power was the paradigm. So that everyone believed in other spirits and still do compared to the West.
Mm.
So it isn't about just guilt and innocence. It's there are powers. Who's the most powerful? So I think we're learning a lot from other missiologists who have gone before us in that area of how do we find the common ground? When can we be open and leave it neutral? And when do we really need to kind of put a warning flag up of, hey, that's not neutral. That's potentially a really dangerous path to go down. As much as, yeah, young people especially don't like the good evil dichotomy.
Mm.
But I really like what you said earlier, Melanie, about, I think it's like, harness our reactions when we first, because maybe I'm naive, maybe my experience is wrong, but most of the people, your neighbors, the young people that maybe you work with at school, the coworkers, I think they're dabbling, and so that harnessing the reactions is really important. They're
Mm.
just kind of, maybe I'm not an atheist and I'm trying some crystals or I'm trying to get some power from somewhere to help me, and they're they're not hardcore.
They're not witches.
They're not witches. And so that harnessing of our reactions is a really good way to say it, to not alienate, to keep what we say all the time on our social media is how do we keep the conversation going rather than shutting it down.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that maybe it comes back to that right and wrong thing of like, if you want to be right and win the argument, well, you might, but they're not going to talk to you again because they're going to feel shut down and they're going to feel like, well, I'm wrong. And nobody wants to hang out with somebody who makes them feel wrong all the time. So that, if we're labeling everything as good and bad and right and wrong, it can be helpful to some people, I think. But I think most people want to work that out and come to that conclusion themselves. And I feel like most of the decisions in my life where I've worked it out myself and come to the conclusion in conversation with other people, I own it. There's not very many things I like being told that I'm wrong. And then, there are some things you just, you get the maths problem wrong and it's wrong. But, and I think we often thought of the Christian faith in terms of truth in that same sort of way. It's very black and white. It's right or wrong. It's good and evil. And maybe that's not the way that we think about truth anymore. And therefore, that's why those ways of sharing the gospel don't work as well, is because people are like, well, it's true in that context, but and it's true here, but that's not how I think about truth anymore. And I think a lot of what you've been talking about is people experiencing things. A lot of this feels like if we're equipping young people to share faith like this, they've got to be able to think on their feet. They've got to be able to exercise quite good EQ, be emotionally attuned, and they've got to hold tension. Like this feels quite high bar relationally, if I'm thinking about it. Like I can imagine some youth leaders and church leaders doing this, but how many teenagers can do this? It would be great if they could. That'd be a really wonderful life skill to have anyway. It would enhance your relationships. But is this doable by many teenagers?
I love the question. I just think of in our local ministry, a couple months ago, we were training our own young people about how to talk to their friends. And I had one 16-year-old come up to me afterwards and he shrugged his shoulders like, I want to tell my friends about Jesus, but like, I can't even get them to like my favorite films. So how could I ever get them to like Jesus?
Yeah.
It's like, man, I can totally identify with that. It's so honest. I love it. But yeah, it does. I do feel sometimes it feels high bar because you're listening, you're reacting. But I think we, especially when we equip young people, it's here's 2 or 3 really good questions, and then listen, and then don't be afraid to state some of your own things as well. And I'm sure Aaron brought this up when you were talking with him and Amplify, because they do this really well. I think we can state some things after we've listened, and I think there's a time for the truth telling, because Christianity is true and credible and the gospel and the scriptures. But I think early on it's stating, well, this is my experience, or this is how God has helped me. And this is when I've encountered Jesus, this is how it's helped my life. So I think that's where we see teenagers can do this. Ask 2 or 3 good questions, have them in your back pocket, listen really well, affirm, find the common ground, but then, don't be afraid to say, well, this is how God's changing my life, and this is how he's helping me.
And I think that's where the wildly diverse experiences of so many Christians can come to the fore. Somebody might be like, well, I encounter God when I take Eucharist in my very, traditional church. And, Jess was telling the story of a young child who was Orthodox and wanted to have these sort of relics or images of Jesus and wanted to share faith with them. And she was like, that's so off the grid for me. But that's how you encountered Jesus. And who else around you might also encounter Jesus in that way. And that's great. Bring it, because it's their experience of encountering Jesus and sharing their own testimony. It's very authentic. And people be like, that's different. That's not what I was expecting you to say. And then they lean in. And I think maybe there's more of, instead of trying to equip young people with a particular methodology or a program or anything, it's equip them with confidence to share their experience of God, to share the truth that they have found, and to listen well. And I think a lot of the people we've been talking to, it's about helping young people listen well, but also not be ashamed of their experience of God.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much there, Melanie. I feel like we could unpack that for another hour. Totally agree. And I think it's also just giving our Christian young people the freedom to fail, or the freedom to freeze is probably more accurate in those sharing faith conversations.
Hmm.
Because the people they're sharing faith with their friends, they're in relationship with them, right? So they'll
Yeah.
have more opportunities to come back around and, hey, when that happened, or when you said that, this is what I felt, or this is what I thought. And it just, again, it frees us up from that picture of sharing faith that's only with a stranger on the street. It's like, if we're doing it with our friends and neighbors, we will have the chance, if we froze in the moment, to come back around and keep the
Hmm.
conversation going.
Hmm. Yeah. And again, that's healthy relational skills. Oh, I didn't manage to apologize before, but I need to say sorry now. Or I've been thinking about this since then, and what I want to say is this. Like, that's how you do real life with people. Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah.
So if church leaders are listening to this and thinking, I would like a bit more. I would like somebody to equip my young people, or equip us as a church to share faith, to stir up curiosity. How can they get in touch with you or find out more about your resources?
Yeah. So they can go to the website, start2stir.com. And we do training workshops, so we can come do an interactive workshop, and teach some principles. But I think the tools that we've created kind of do it for themselves. So we'd really recommend, we have a new video series called Soul Stirrers, and they're only 3 minutes long. They're free on YouTube. So you can go on YouTube, search Start to Stir, find our channel. And it's just little 3-minute videos that stir up these spiritual longings around our desire to connect, our desire to worship our favorite footballer or celebrity, our attempts to pray even when we say we don't believe or we're not religious. So really short video clips that kind of do the stirring for you. So if you're a chaplain or a schools worker, we've got loads of schools across the country using them in assemblies and collective worship and lunch clubs.
Free?
They're free. And then, young people can text them to their friends and keep conversations going. And again, there's pointers once you start with the videos of where to go next after that curiosity is piqued. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend. Go to start2stir.com, or go to YouTube, type in Start to Stir, and use some of those little soul stirring videos.
Wonderful. Well, I feel encouraged to go and make people curious. That feels very doable. Like, asking a good question feels quite doable, I think. And then maybe that is the changing the narrative around evangelism, isn't it? It's like, it's definitely not getting somebody over a line. It's definitely not making somebody do the whole journey in a day. It's stirring up curiosity, as you say, and allowing the Holy Spirit to do a lot of the work.
And I think, like you said, Melanie, it's about the person feeling like they chose it rather than we forced them and backed them into a corner. Because when they choose it for themselves, and I think often when it's over time, that's when it really sticks. Because it was the Holy Spirit illuminating them. So.
Oh, this has been really helpful. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for all the resources and thinking that you're doing on this. It's been helpful.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Melanie. It's been great.
Links to the Start to Stir resources and the YouTube channel are in the show notes. If you want to explore some of these topics with your church or youth group, Roots has a resource in our Discovering God series called Good Vibrations, out with issue 145. You can get it on our website from July 2026. And it explores a Christian take on the whole idea of manifesting and the universe. Our Discovering God series is a great place to start if you're introducing people to the Christian faith. It assumes no prior knowledge of the Bible or church and allows you to explore together and ask questions. You can get the whole series with a subscription to Roots, or buy them as a PDF bundle from our online store. For more in our Reimagining Evangelism series, exploring fresh and effective ways that the church is engaging with evangelism and helping young people share faith, you can check out the article series on the Roots website. Roots is committed to helping you lead a great church that's growing, relevant, engaging, authentic, and together. We want to spark your creativity, help you to engage hearts and minds, and together authentically respond to God's word. We have weekly preaching resources, articles, podcasts, prayers, intercessions, worship ideas, creative ways to read and respond to scripture together. All for adults, intergenerational settings, and with children, youth, and under fives. It's everything you need to lead great church, all in one simple, great value subscription. Head to rootsforchurches.com to find out more or take out a free trial. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with your friends and network, and leave us a review so that others can find it. Together, we can grow.